It's Zero Blitz with Frank and Fitz. He's Frank Schwab. I'm Jason Fitz, Yahoo Sports. Frank, let's be honest. This episode started sort of weird because Joe D, producer extraordinary behind the scenes, didn't have us clap. We start every episode by counting down and clapping to make sure everything's synced. There was no clap today. I don't know what that means for us. I feel like a boy band with no choreography. I don't know what we're supposed to do with our hands.
You know, I felt like I should just cut you off right there to act like we didn't have any timing because yes, I feel totally off. No clap to start with, but I'm sure it'll be a good episode anyway.
It is going to be a great episode because we're going to Mount Rushmore team by team. We're going to figure out position by position. What teams have the best Mount Rushmore at each position?
Basically, the Mount Rushmore of Mount Rushmores is what we're trying to do here. Yes.
I kind of like this. We've taken the basic Mount Rushmore argument and we've put it on speed. Before we get to that, though, I want to get something off my chest about Hard Knocks because Hard Knocks, the Giants edition, has come out and they're putting out all these cute little clips of how the Giants value Daniel Jones and the process of Saquon and all these things. But let's be honest. Hard Knocks proved that they're really soft knocks, and they proved that the year that they covered my beloved Raiders. Because if we're going to be honest, that year was the Antonio Brown training camp meltdown, if you remember, of which they covered basically none of it. So you have this entire story that is taking not only the sports universe by storm, but the entire world. Everybody's looking at whatever is going on with Antonio Brown. And they covered it for like 6 seconds. That was the year of the weird cryo on his feet that burned his feet and had the helmet issues and all these things. And he was begging to get cut before he even played a single play for him. Like, it was this awful, awful training camp. And they covered none of it when they were actually supposed to be covering all of it. From that day, I realized that HBO is a joke, that Hard Knocks is a joke, that the entire show is a joke, and there's no reason I'm ever going to watch it until they give me something real and tangible in an episode that makes me say, oh my God, and I don't think, Frank, they have the guts to ever do it.
Yeah, probably not. A key part of this is, I don't know if a lot of people know this, I know you do, I know I do, teams have final control over the editorial on this, as they do with most anything mic'd up, NFL films, all that kind of stuff. And so you're getting what the team wants you to see, and they're going to cut out what they don't. Now, I will say this, real life getting in the way here. My cable box died, Fitz. It's making weird noises. I can't get it to work. So I have not seen the first episode of the Giants offseason Hard Knocks. I have seen some clips. I wonder, and one clip I did see that kind of made me roll my eyes was Joe Shane, their general manager, saying, oh, Daniel Jones is still our guy. Nobody could win in this situation. Not even Patrick Mahomes could win in this situation. It's like, well, you guys tried to trade up to number 3, and we all know that. Like, what? I don't know yet without watching the first episode, and obviously we haven't seen the rest of them, how they kind of dance around this. If they're just if this show acts like, oh, Malik Neighbors was our guy the whole time, and we never thought about another quarterback or trade up, then they'll lose a lot of credibility. But I don't know. And even to the point of, look, I've agreed with you. I do agree with you on a lot of the Hard Knock stuff, a lot of the mic'd up stuff. I think the NFL takes itself way, way, way too seriously. I've made the joke before that they treat themselves as another branch of the military. Your secrets aren't that important. It's football. It's an entertainment business. And you're going to see them getting around stuff. And Brian Daboll even came out and said, when I wanted to have a conversation with my general manager and I didn't want that to be on Hard Knocks, I would just put music on my phone because I knew they couldn't use it. As you know, like, there's copyright issues. And if you're playing, a Taylor Swift song in the background, you can't use that clip. So I think this show is just not going to have as much punch as I want because these NFL teams are way too serious about everything. And they don't want, like they're going to portray this as like, Daniel Jones is our guy. Look how hard he's rehabbing, when in reality, you're looking for a replacement. And we all know that.
Yeah, what else are they going to do right before the season starts? Give you video telling you that they don't believe in their starting quarterback going into a year where he might be playing to save everybody's jobs? Like, we need to be smarter than this. Like, it's fun because we're football starved and it's July and it's the worst sports month of the entire year. Like, July is single-handedly the worst sports month of the year. And so we're all going to watch it, but it's still going to suck. What's not going to suck is what we're about to do, though. Okay, so let's lay this out, Frank, for the world. We got into, somebody posted on social media, somebody I follow posted on social media, a picture of the running backs historically of the Tennessee Titans, and essentially said, find me a better running back history in any franchise anywhere. And I sort of laughed at that. I sent it to the group and I was like, well, this is an interesting exercise. And we've
And
decided
then we started talking about it for like an hour and thought, this is a pretty good idea for a show. And let's just do every position. What's the greatest Mount Rushmore? Like, are the Packers have the best quarterback Mount Rushmore? And do the Titans have the best running back Mount Rushmore? I do struggle with the whole like Titans, hey, here's Earl Campbell. It's like seeing like Big Ten Network showing like, hey, the greatest games in Oregon history. Like, but whatever. Okay, that's part of it. I love this exercise, but yes, that's how we got onto this topic.
So we're going to go position by position. We might leave some out that we care less about, like fat guys, but we're going to go position by position, and we're going to figure out which team wins in the Mount Rushmore competition. You guys can obviously chime in on social media, but mostly if you agree with us at Yahoo Schwab, at Jason Fitz. All right, let's start with the quarterbacks because quarterbacks are sexy and everybody loves them. This one, tough. I want to hear where you go first because I'm trying to figure out how we balance longevity and greatness with a couple of guys versus, some people that might have a deeper bench. We're talking about the Mount Rushmore. When I say Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks, the first franchise that comes to mind for you is?
Well, for me, it's the Green Bay Packers, but let me take a step back and kind of my thought process here. When I'm doing a Mount Rushmore, the greatest Mount Rushmore, I want a alpha at the top of that. Like I thought about a team like the Rams. The Rams have a really kind of cool quarterback history. Kurt Warner, Matthew Stafford, Norm Van Brocklin, Bob Waterfield. Those are four great players, right? Might all four make the Hall of Fame if Stafford makes it. But who's your number one guy? Is it really Kurt Warner? Okay. I want a guy leading the charge, right? And then what do you do? Like there's a lot of teams where you're like getting really excited and then you realize there's no third or fourth guy, but are there top two or three enough to carry it? Like I think about the Lions running backs. Like you're like Barry Sanders or Billy Sims. Yes. And then you're like, there's no number three guy. And you just can't put them in this argument, right? So it's really a balance of I want a guy really good at the top and I want your number four to be good unless unless your number one and two is just so great. It doesn't even matter who your number four is. We'll get to some of those arguments. So when I think about quarterbacks, the first team that came to mind was the Packers. I know Chicago Bears fans, Minnesota Vikings fans don't want to hear it, but this run of quarterback play has been unbelievable. Your top three, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers at 7 MVPs between them. Bart Starr, one of the great winning quarterbacks of all time, one of the great leaders. You got to find a fourth. That's not easy. I don't know. We can't put Jordan Love there yet, right? And I also in this exercise, I don't want to go too deep into history. I love football history. I love the old black and white stuff. I could nerd out on that for a really long time. But like if I say the name Arnie Herbert, nobody knows who that is. He's a Hall of Famer, but nobody knows who that is. But, the fourth guy might be Lynn Dickey, who was a really good player in the 80s. Nobody remembers. But I started with the Packers. I have trouble with the fourth guy, but still, your top three, so strong that that's the first team I thought of.
Yeah, so for me, this really came down to two different the Packers were on my list, but there were two different teams that really stood out. And I didn't worry as much about getting through four. I just looked at it and said, when I say 1, 2, and 3, do you say holy you know what? So the 49ers, you got Steve Young, you got Joe Montana. That's 1, 2. But I struggled when I started thinking about 3. I'm like, am I really going to put Jeff Garcia on a Mount Rushmore and feel good about it? I don't know that. So then I looked at the Colts because you got Peyton, you got Johnny Unitas, which we all like. I think, I don't want to go too deep into the archives, but obviously we all know Johnny Unitas. And I think that Andrew Luck puts himself in there. So that became really tough for me. So I really sort of grappled between the two of those. But the greatness, particularly of what we saw from Montana and Young, like I'm looking at this Mount Rushmore and thinking like there's two faces on it and the rest you're just sort of blurred out. Like I don't know what to do with that. I don't disagree with you. I think the power of 3 because Favre, Rodgers, and Starr really stand out from Green Bay. I think Green Bay gets the edge here. I just want to challenge the thought a little bit and make sure the 49ers, or even, as you pointed out, maybe Dallas deserves a little love in this.
And that's the thing I had with Dallas. It's really good, but who leads the list? It's probably Staubach, but is Staubach really a top 5 guy? Cowboys fans might argue yes, but they're so deep with Staubach, Aikman, Romo. Dak's on there now. Dak is a heck of a player. Dandy Don Meredith. Danny White was a heck of a player for a while, but who's your alpha on there? Staubach, I guess. But, Aikman compared to like a Brett Favre. Nope, going Green Bay there. So that's really interesting. The thing with the Niners, Montana and Young obviously lead that. John Brodie was MVP in 1970. Really good player in most of the 60s. He would probably be on there with Jeff Garcia. I don't know deep we want to go into history, but I think a lot of old 49ers fans, and trust me, I'm not calling anybody old because I'm old myself, are kind of nodding their heads saying, yeah, I remember John Brodie. He was a heck of a player. So, yeah, you're right. Like, it is weird. Like, Jeff Garcia, really, on a Mount Rushmore, but your top two guys are so good. I just don't think the Cowboys have the kind of top end to make this argument against the Packers, but they have a lot of depth. They have 6-7 guys who could be on that Mount Rushmore. But yes, ultimately, I can't get them over the Packers. To me, it's kind of the Colts or the Packers. We talked about the Packers. Fourth guy for the Colts could be Burt Jones, MVP in the 70s, was really, really good before injuries took him away. Bill Belichick loves gushing about Burt Jones, who I caught up with a couple years ago for a story. Really, really good guy, good interview. The Colts have when you lead off with Peyton Manning and Johnny Unitas, like, okay, like, you got my attention. And so to me, if I get the 49ers argument, I would come down to Packers or Colts here. I don't know if you want to, if there's any, would the 49ers?
No, I think you're right. It's Packers or Colts. So then who's the best quarterback? Let's take the old guys. In my mind, if we go Bart Starr versus Johnny Unitas, those two sort of cancel each other out. I'm going to put them both on the same shelf of liquor, right? Those two sort of cancel each other. So then I got Peyton Manning versus Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers. I think Peyton Manning is better than either Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers. The problem is, I think Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, whichever one you're talking about, is substantially better because of the amount of time they've played and the success they've had in longevity than Andrew Luck. So if I'm doing it that way, I feel like that gets me to Green Bay as the winner of this.
Yeah, probably. No matter who you put in that fourth spot, I'd probably end up putting Lynn Dickey in there. Ernie Herbert's it's such an old, it's so hard. It's so hard when you go that deep into history. Lynn Dickey they just had no defense in the 80s. Trust me, as a kid growing up in Wisconsin, I watched a lot of Packers games where that defense was terrible, but they still put up a lot of numbers. I'd probably go Packers here too. And I honestly, I think probably in 5 years, we're just saying, yeah, Jordan Love is number 4 guy. What are we even talking about? Because this is just a runaway.
All right, so the votes are in. The Zero Blitz pick for the team with the best quarterback, Mount Rushmore, Green Bay Packers. I feel good about this. We're 1 for 1. We've nailed it. We've come to a consensus.
Really good, really good. And it's a good Mount Rushmore to be the best Mount Rushmore, right? And I could already hear 49ers fans arguing with us. Like, 49ers fans are going to be up in arms that they're not the quarterback Mount Rushmore, because they're going to be like, Montana and Young, what do you want from us? Like, this shouldn't even be an argument. So that's the beauty of this, isn't it?
We're just getting started. Let's go to running backs next. And again, this started because of the tweet that somebody put out with the Titans, which included the Oilers. But I'll be honest with you, Frank. When I started this process, my first thought was running back's going to be one of the easiest positions because it's got to be the Cowboys. In my mind, it had to be the Cowboys immediately because of Emmitt, Dorsett, Zeke. That made a lot of sense. But then I sat there in my own mind and said, that's a little disrespectful to what the 49ers have, because last time I checked, Roger Craig, like Christian McCaffrey, who we're seeing right now, Frank Gore. So for me, this was sort of a two-head race. Who am I missing?
I think the one team, and look, let's go through the Titans real quick, because it started this whole conversation between us, right? When you have Eddie George, Derrick Henry, Earl Campbell, and Chris Johnson, that's really fun. That's great. People are going to forget how great Chris Johnson was. He had perhaps the greatest non-quarterback season of all time of any player. Like, he was unbelievable that year that he set the record for all-purpose yards. I love Chris Johnson. He's just a really, really fun player, but I think I'll give you one team that really stood out when you go old school, the Browns. Jim Brown, Leroy Kelly, Marion Motley. The fourth is a little tough, but Nick Chubb has had a pretty good career. So I wanted to get them. I wanted to get them there because I love Jim Brown so much in that history. But I think the team that stood out to me when I really sat down and started, research, really thinking about this, really looking up a lot of the history, the Colts, man. The Colts have had a heck of a run. Edgerrin James, Marshall Faulk, Eric Dickerson, who was better with the Colts than anybody remembers, and Lenny Moore. I know we're not trying to go like black and white on all these guys. Lenny Moore is a heck of a football player. He played some flanker, some halfback, so what do you put him at? But ultimately, you put him at halfback. And then you could also just go Alan Amici or Jonathan Taylor is your fourth if you wish, on Wisconsin, right? Like, they had a great run of running backs. The Colts have the top end guy, Marshall Faulk, who's to me one of the top 10 running backs of all time. Edgerrin James, unbelievable player. I think the Colts have a real argument here against the Titans or Cowboys or really whoever you want to go with.
Okay, so the Colts is eye-opening for me, but I'll go back to the Cowboys for a minute. Tony Dorsett epitomized what it was to be an NFL running back, and he was a Cowboy for a portion of his career, right? Emmitt Smith, NFL's leading rusher, obviously, like it did everything that he did there. We're not even.
By the way, Fitz, real quick, Emmitt Smith has become to me the most underrated player in NFL history. I really probably that's hyperbole, so I'm going to back off that a little bit. But I think everybody likes downgrading Emmitt Smith. I always like to think that this dude rushed for 1,800 yards. Like you'd have to rush for 1,500 yards a season for 12 straight years, and you still wouldn't catch Emmitt Smith. I know he had a great offensive line. I know he played on a great team. Emmitt Smith is still awesome, and people like everybody's like, "Oh, Barry was 10 times better than Emmitt," and all his. I like Barry. I love Barry. Emmitt Smith kind of gets shortchanged here. So when you talk about like Mount Rushmore, who's leading your Mount Rushmore? Emmitt Smith, yes. Put him. He's your alpha right there. I love that. My only problem with the Cowboys.
But wait. There's one more to throw in. Herschel Walker was so good that an entire draft was traded that eventually changed the entire landscape of the Cowboys and the NFL throughout the course of the 90s. Like, that's how good Herschel was. Like, I know we forget Herschel Walker because it didn't necessarily live up to that hype, but my God, like, when you've had Herschel, Emmitt, Dorsett, and Zeke, that's tough to beat.
That's tough to beat. Or even Calvin Hill had a good career. Herschel Walker just, man, if he didn't go to USFL. I mean, look at his USFL numbers sometimes. I know it wasn't the best competition, but my goodness, if you just put 2/3 of those numbers in the NFL, we're talking this probably isn't even a discussion. Herschel was awesome in his prime, obviously great, maybe the greatest college running back of all time. I get that. I get the Cowboys argument too. So do we have them ahead of the Titans? Because the Titans kind of, boy, they have some good players up there too. I could see the argument though. I mean, when you make the argument for Herschel there, it's really tipping the scales to me where I'm like, maybe we do have the Dallas Cowboys as our running back Mount Rushmore.
I don't know though. Like I'm sitting here. This is what's wild about it. Now I'm going back to the Colts and saying, Edger and James. Like when you think about like list. Not just Hall of Famers, but guys that just defined everything for that era. Edger and James, Falk, Dickerson. Like that's just.
I'm giving it's a little hard, like, yeah, Dickerson, it's kind of taking a little bit of what we remember from the Rams, right? Like, oh my God, he was so awesome. But he was good with the Colts. One team I will throw out there for you is the Rams. We go back to Eric Dickerson. Dickerson, Falk again, Steven Jackson and Todd Gurley. That's pretty darn good. I mean, if you want to throw like Elroy Hirsch, I mean, from way back when. The Rams are kind of the Rams are on a lot of these lists. Trust me. Like you're like, wow, the Rams have a really good history. Running back too. This was to me the toughest list. Like this was like I was like I don't know who I'm going to go with in this run. I was hoping you were going to kind of guide me here on which team I was going to pick because
I cannot get past the fact that Emmitt, Dorsett, Zeke, and I'm putting Herschel on that list.
Herschel, that's fine.
I mean, I think that's. As much as I love Eddie George and as much as I love Derrick Henry, and we talked about the fact that Earl Campbell being included, I get it because you've got ties with the Oilers. That obviously matters. Chris Johnson was an amazing player, but it was a very short run, right, of amazing football from here. Right. So it's really about those three. Like again, we're going to go like best v best. If today if you told me in their prime when they were in their prime with these teams that I could have Eddie George. Or I could have Emmitt Smith. I don't know that I'm not taking Emmitt Smith in that, right? Like if I can have Tony Dorsett or I can have Derrick Henry. I love Derrick Henry, but I think that's to me that still goes to Dorsett. It's like I'm going up. Sure, Earl Campbell over a lot of these guys in that era. I'll give you that. But I think that there's a small edge to the Cowboys. I feel like the Cowboys are the right choice.
I'm kind of going with that too because again, if you wanted to tell me Emmitt Smith is the greatest running back of all time, okay, I'm going to sit back and listen. I'll probably say it's Jim Brown or Barry Sanders, but that's how, I just think Emmitt Smith has just kind of been disregarded because of the supporting cast. No. He was an awesome player tough, reliable, durable, productive, big games, anything you want out of a football player, Emmitt Smith was. So, if you're going to argue the bottom of the list, kind of the Herschel Walker bumps up the grade. I bump it up because I love Emmitt Smith so much and have come to appreciate him so much more over the last 30 years. I think I'm with you. I think it's probably, I didn't come into this thinking Dallas, but I think I'm convinced here it's the Cowboys.
So the winner has been decided. The closest vote yet we've ever had. The Zero Blitz pick for the team with the best running back Mount Rushmore The Dallas Cowboys. People are going to get fired up about that one. Listen to the whole show and hear the debate before you come at us on social media.
And by the way, Bears fans, I know, I know you're upset, but you got the top two guys, of course, Peyton, Sayers, awesome. Who's your third? Who's your fourth? I mean, we're talking about Matt Forte. We're talking about Neil Anderson. Like, they're fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with those guys, obviously. But, yeah, that's where it kind of falls apart. Because I know Bears fans are going to think, we got Peyton and Sayers. How are we not in this conversation? It's because you really don't have much beyond them.
Which is about to make me very hypocritical. Because when we get to the tight ends, like, look, for me,
it's hard.
I have a hard time when we're talking about the Mount Rushmore of what team has the best Mount Rushmore tight end. When you have two of the greatest we have ever seen or will ever see play the game, when you've got Kelsey and Gonzalez, it's hard for me not to just be like, I don't care if you put me and Frank on the Mount Rushmore after that. Like, I just don't care. Like, at this point, those two are so stinking good. You could make an argument. I think this was tight for me between the Chiefs and the Patriots, but the greatness of the top two and the Chiefs, you got to talk me out of it, Frank.
I don't know that I can, because you go to their Pro Football Reference page on career leading receivers. They have two guys in their history that have more than 10,000 yards receiving, and they're both tight ends. Like, it's ridiculous. That is so silly. Kelsey might be the greatest tight end of all time. Tony Gonzalez might be the greatest tight end of all time. Like, you can make that argument. I like Gronk in that conversation. But if you wanted to put those guys 1-2, totally fine with that. So how do you not? And they did have a guy in the 60s, Fred Urbanus, 3-time All-Pro. He was part of their first Super Bowl team. He's no joke. I mean, he gets on that list. I have no idea who the number 4 is for the tight ends, the Kansas City Chiefs, but it's going to be them. But I will. Look, we got the Patriots caught my eye because I love Gronk, obviously. I think he's the most dominant tight end I've ever seen, 2 ways catching it and blocking. Russ Francis was a heck of a player. We remember him with the 49ers. He had a great run with the Patriots, too. Ben Coates was a really good player in the 90s. Ben Coates was
great, yeah.
Ben Coates is one of those guys, you bring up his name and everybody our age is like, oh, wow, yeah, I remember Ben Coates. And then we have to bring up Aaron Hernandez, obviously. A lot of other stories with Aaron Hernandez, but heck of a player in his prime. I mean, if you're going just depth, maybe, but I don't care. It's got to be the Chiefs. How could you pick anybody else but the Chiefs here?
Well, we'll make everybody mad. The Zero Blitz pick for the team with the best tight end, Mount Rushmore, Kansas City. Even though they only got 2 of them, or 3.
We'll just put them twice. We'll just put Kelsey twice and Gonzalez twice. And
just give us a couple different. We'll give Kelsey, and then we'll just put Taylor on there somewhere, and then everybody will be happy. Nobody can be mad at us. Let's go with the next one, wide receivers. I'll let you go first because I'm going to make a plea for a team. I know. You know I'm going to make a plea for a team. But you go ahead. On the best Mount Rushmore wide receivers, I think there's a couple teams that really stood out. Which one stands out the most to you?
There are a few of them. The one that pops immediately to mind and it checks out when you do the research, the Vikings are pretty silly here. I mean, they have Chris Carter, Randy Moss, Justin Jefferson, and Anthony Carter, who we all remember from the 80s. Heck of a player. He had that great playoff game against the 49ers, so he gets on there. But even if you don't prefer Anthony Carter, he still has Stephon Diggs, Sammy White, Adam Thielen. Like, they have a great receiver history.
Oh my God, yeah.
That's the team. Yeah, that's the team I kind of came to. The Steelers are really interesting. I don't know that they got the alpha at the top, but Swan, Stallworth, Hines Ward, and Antonio Brown. That's deep. Like, those are 4. Look, Antonio Brown has his issues too, but one of the best receivers I've ever seen. They're fantastic. And I'll throw out the Packers.
Well, stop there for 1 second because I think if I'm going Carter, Moss, Carter, and Jefferson, I would take that over the Steelers that you just gave me. So, like, as we narrow these down, I think, Moss and Jefferson, and then, there is some Carter, level of, Carter's no joke. What he accomplished was absolutely incredible, and the fact that there are so many guys that can pop into it. So I give the Vikings the edge over the Steelers so far. Who's next on your list?
The Packers. I mean, all these NFL history did exist before the Super Bowl. Don Hutson, go back and look it up. I'm sorry. He's been old school guys, historians call him one of the greatest players of all time. You can look at the numbers. He was so far ahead of his peers. It's unbelievable. And then you add Don Hutson to Sterling Sharp, James Lofton, Devontae Adams. If you prefer Donald Driver, Jordy Nelson in that 4 spot, I'm fine with that. But that's pretty strong too. It's a great group. And we have to talk about the 49ers, right?
Because the Packers are the Mount Rushmore of mediocrity compared. Come on, man. Like, those are all good, but they're not in the same range. But
right.
Now you've gotten to one.
Sterling Sharp is a beast.
Sterling Sharp is a beast,
Sterling Sharp was one of my favorite players growing up. Just an unbelievable player. And
one little tease here, by the way. Lofton's name isn't done coming up as I will make a plea. Go ahead. One more.
Not.
The 49ers have to be on this.
Yeah,
at least in the
we have to talk about them. Okay, so Rice and Teal. Okay, we got those two. Then what, though? I mean, Dwight Clark was a very, very good player. John Taylor was a very, very good player. But, I mean, when you're talking about, like, comparing them to an Anthony Carter, Justin Jefferson / Chris Carter, like, it's hard. Or if you're comparing them to Hines Ward, Antonio Brown, like, I mean, it's just, they're good. I like John Taylor, but we wouldn't remember John Taylor if he played for the Chiefs in the 80s, right? Like, we remember him catching passes to Joe Montana. And like, I had a hard time with the 49ers just because it's like, you have a difficult time rounding it out. Their top two are unbelievable. But this isn't exactly the tight end race. It's impossible to find 4 good tight ends from any franchise. It is absolutely possible to find 4 great receivers from multiple franchises. So that's why I don't have the 49ers in my pole position here.
So the Vikings so far the clear leader. Just let me make my plea, my very biased plea. The first time I'm coming in very biased on this, but I will just say, if you were my age and you're a Raiders fan, you remember what feels like a lifetime ago when Jerry Rice and Tim Brown were unstoppable together. Now, I know we think of Jerry Rice as a 49er, but his years with the Raiders were wildly productive, right? So, I mean, the years with the Raiders, and then Tim Brown, Hall of Famer for a reason. Cliff Branch, you want to talk about going back? Cliff Branch, and then Biletnikoff. I mean, like, I'm a humble brag. I'm a Biletnikoff award voter. That's right. The name of the receiver that's on the best college football receiver award every year is Fred Biletnikoff. Like, when you start talking about that, and then don't forget James Lofton also had productive years on those Raiders teams, and you know Randy Moss even rented a year out there. So like,
no.
I mean, Randy Moss was bad there. Randy Moss was there, but Jerry Rice, Tim Brown, Cliff Branch, Fred Biletnikoff. To me, that is a tough tandem to be. I will give you the greatness of what you've described with the Vikings. Can I talk you into Jerry Rice, Tim Brown, Cliff Branch, and Fred Biletnikoff and all the stickum that came with them?
Oh, fantastic. I mean, talk about, Biletnikoff, like you said, like a Super Bowl MVP, and Cliff Branch finally got his due into the Hall of Fame. I like that. Tim Brown, obviously a Hall of Famer. Jerry Rice, to me, the greatest football player of all time. So, there's no holes in that. Like that's a pretty strong group. When I saw it, look, we have a rundown for our show. I looked at this. I was like, oh my goodness, Fitz is going to like try to get the Raiders on here. And then I thought about it. I'm like, he's actually got a point, and he made it well. I just, it's hard for me to get him over the Vikings. That's all. I mean, we're also kind of projecting Justin Jefferson and what he's going to do, but what he's done so far is absolutely positively so ridiculous.
Devontae. I got Devontae on my, like, Devontae's over here not even making it, guys. And Devontae's put up like, don't look at the wins and losses. Look at the numbers Devontae has put up with absolute hot garbage at quarterback. I mean, am I talking to you? I'm trying here.
You could go. What are we gonna do? Like James Jett, and we're just
Willie
gonna
Galt
go win
James
away.
Jett. We're just gonna go.
Galt, like, oh god, I actually love those guys. Yeah, getting all the feels from.
You couldn't touch
80s,
me on Tecmo Bowl
90s.
because my guys were so fast.
I love it.
All right.
Any Tecmo Bowl reference does get extra points, but I think we all know where we're going here.
All right. Well, with a large dissenting opinion, the award is in for the Zero Blitz pick for the team with the best wide receiver Mount Rushmore in history. It's the Minnesota Vikings. With dissenting opinion, it's the Minnesota Vikings. All right. Fat guys, look, it feels like the Cowboys. Like, we're going to go offensive lineman. It feels like it's a Cowboys sort of thing. But, because I think of the Cowboys and their great offensive lines, although I will say that there was an era where my beloved Raiders also, Frank, had obviously the 70s, some of those 80s offensive linemen. There's some plea for the Raiders here, but I think when we think great offensive linemen, we think Cowboys.
Yes, I'll make the plea for you for the Raiders. I mean, anytime you got Jim Otto, Gene Upshaw, Art Shell, that's a pretty strong start. It's unbelievable. Those guys played on the same line for like a decade. And then Steve Wisniewski was a heck of a football player. I mean, all 90s team, 8 Pro Bowls, I believe. I mean, he's your fourth. You're doing pretty well. I'll throw out the Vikings again. The Vikings keep coming up. It's unbelievable they haven't won a Super Bowl. I'm sorry, Vikings fans. Randall McDaniel, Gary Zimmerman, McTinglehoff, a Hall of Fame center, Steve Hutchinson, great Hall of Fame guard, and Ron Yeri. All those guys are Hall of Famers, and they all played for the Minnesota Vikings. That's a really strong group. But yes, I think when you look at the Cowboys, Larry Allen, rest in peace, is such a tragic story from this offseason. Give him a shout out. Rayfield Wright, their great tackle for a long time. I loved watching Eric Williams play. He was the one guy who really had his way with Reggie White. Like I remember watching those battles, and Eric Williams was the one guy who just wouldn't get pushed around by Reggie. It was unbelievable. And then I think Zach Martin's already on that list. I mean, he's made so many Pro Bowls in the modern day, been so great for them. They have other guys, Mark Stepnoski, Nate Newton, Tyron Smith had a great career with them. Yeah, I think it's Cowboys, but man, when you got 5 Hall of Famers from the Vikings, that's pretty tough. And the Raiders have a good argument too.
This one I'm genuinely torn on because you are talking about so much greatness. And I think, I was so busy trying to cram my Raiders in on the wide receiver conversation that I almost didn't give them enough love on the offensive line. To have as many Hall of Famers as you're talking about across the board, I think there's more depth with the Cowboys, so I would lean Cowboys, but you could talk me into the Vikings. I think the Cowboys are the right choice, though. Are we ready to say that definitively?
I think so. This is tough. I can't lie to it. All three of these teams, you can make a good argument for, but I guess the Cowboys, just because we all remember that great line in the 90s, and obviously they've had guys before, since. We've kind of almost think of the Cowboys, especially because of that 90s crew, as offensive line university. Like, I mean, I know they're not a university, but whatever. You know where I'm getting at with this. We think of offensive line and great offensive lines. We think of the Cowboys first, I think. So, yeah, that's probably the pick here for me.
All right, so the pick is in, the Zero Blitz pick for the team with the best offensive line, Mount Rushmore, in a very close vote, very heated with a lot of Hall of Famers. Tip of the cap to the Dallas Cowboys. All right, well, we've finished the offensive side of the ball, but we got to get the defense some love too. And it gets pretty heated as we look at some of the positions we got left. We'll do that when we come back. All right, we've had a chance to collect ourselves. We're ready to continue arguing through Mount Rushmores on the defensive side of the ball, Frank. And let's go with pass rushers because pass rushers are sexy. So when I say pass rushers, there are certain teams that we think of automatically, and this is where it gets difficult because when I say pass rushers, we think of the purple people eater sort of defenses. We think of the Steelers as an organization. They all stand out, but where it gets tough is when you're trying to figure out top 4 in a Mount Rushmore situation. It gets a little tricky. So who stands out the most to you?
And you talk about, we've done this exercise with a few teams where you get a couple guys and you're like, I wish they had more, because I wanted to get LT on this list, right? Like LT at Strahan, let's go. Then you realize you can't fill it out. You can't. There's just not enough. I think one of the most eye-opening things about this exercise and just researching it and for the show and just really nerding out on this, the Rams have an argument for the best Mount Rushmores are the best Mount Rushmores with their defensive line. I mean, here are the Rams pass rushers, defensive line, whatever you want to call this. Deacon Jones, Aaron Donald, Merlin Olsen, and Jack Youngblood. That's unbelievable. Like, that is as airtight as it gets to me. And even if you don't remember Jack Youngblood or whatever, Kevin Green, like he had some great years with the Rams too, and was a Hall of Famer and one of the all-time sack leaders. I mean, when you're talking about like literally, like you could make Reggie White would have a lot to say about this, but you could make the argument that the 2 greatest defensive linemen of all time are Deacon Jones and Aaron Donald, and they played for the same franchise. And you had stuff Lamar Lundy, and I mean the Rams front is absolutely positively stacked and unbelievable.
This is like the opposite of the tight end situation where we're not even trying to stretch to get to that 4. When I first saw the list and was thinking about it and you didn't have Kevin Green on it, I sort of rolled my eyes. And then I looked at it again and I was like, nah, that's I don't know that he would make the Mount Rushmore. And that's a staggering statement to make. And it's not taking anything away from the Cowboys, I think, also on this list. The Cowboys have had some really big names and some really great players. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about best of all time, like there is some GOAT element of you'd have to put like the GOAT ice on a couple of the guys on the Rams Mount Rushmore. Like they'd have to be wearing chains that say, "Hey, I'm not just on this Mount Rushmore. I'm the greatest that ever did it at my position." That just hits different,
Real quick, just to like you said, the Cowboys, and let's go with the Cowboys and Steelers because they both are. This is just, it's kind of silly. DeMarcus Ware, Harvey Martin, Randy White, Bob Lilly, Too Tall Jones, and I think you put Micah Parsons on there already. That's wow, like unbelievable. And the Steelers, I mean, any any team, any front that leads off with Joe Green and TJ Watt, like how are we leaving them off? Also, Elsie Greenwood, unbelievable player from the 70s. James Harrison, who was a beast in his day, defensive player of the year, had the great play in the Super Bowl, all that. Kevin Green had some great seasons with them. That's really tough to be like, no, it's not you Cowboys, it's not you Steelers. But when I looked at, I just kind of laughed when I saw this, when I made the list of the Rams guys. I'm like, yeah, it's fairly insane how much defensive line talent they've had come through their great history.
Yeah, this is one of those where if we try and say best versus best from other Mount Rushmores or worst versus worst of these top four, the Rams still win across the board. So the Zero Blitz pick for the team with the best pass rushers, Mount Rushmore, the Rams. So we'll get some heat on that, I'm sure, from Steelers and Cowboys fans. Vikings fans also deserved a little bit of love in that. I don't really think there's a huge conversation to have about linebackers. We all know that the Bears are the team that are synonymous with greatness at that position. So I have a hard time thinking there'd be anybody other than the Bears in this. It's just, this is Chicago's, right?
I tried. I really did. I looked through a lot of different teams, and you get a couple guys, you get a third guy sometimes. But I mean, basically, you're starting with Butkus, Singletary, Urlacher, and Bill George. I mean, people probably don't remember Bill George from the 60s, but he was an 8-time All-Pro. Like, he's kind of the afterthought because he played in that far gone era. So I kept trying to, like, I wanted to make the linebackers part interesting, and it's just like, no, this is the Bears. Like, fine. Like, they win in a walk. If you want to make the argument that this is the greatest Mount Rushmore, the greatest Mount Rushmores, fine. I have no problem with that at all. It's 4 unbelievable star inside linebackers. The Bears are synonymous with great linebacker play. And there's no, I'd be being way too contrarian to try to be like, oh, the Ravens. Like, no. Let's not do this. Or the Cowboys or whoever. This is the Bears. It's easy. It's unanimous. It would be, I can't imagine anybody voting for anybody but the Bears as the greatest position group of linebackers of all time.
That is the Zero Blitz pick for the team of the best linebackers, Mount Rushmore. The Chicago Bears. Chicago finally gets one. They've been in some of these conversations. They finally get one. By the way, as I say that, Frank, it's stunning how many teams just aren't even in. Like, we haven't even mentioned certain franchises' names, and some of them have been successful, right? Like, so it's not that we're sitting here saying they're terrible, terrible teams. It's just when you look at the greatest of the greatest, it's alarming to see some teams not get any love in this conversation. Like, we haven't said anything about the Dolphins, who have an undefeated season in history. We haven't said much about the Patriots, who are the biggest modern dynasty you could ever imagine in sports, right? So it is funny to see how many teams are just completely left out of this equation. Let's go to one more group here. It's the defensive backs. We're combining corners and safeties for this. We're just doing the defensive backfield as a whole, and that's where it gets really interesting. Let me start with a little bit of just my first mindset when you absolutely said this to me. I thought underrated portion of this. I'm not sure they make it, but Denver, given the safeties that they've had, Atwater, Dawkins, Lynch, and then Champ Bailey, like, it is interesting that I'm not sure their corner play holds up to what we would expect from a defensive backfield when you talk about the Mount Rushmores. But certainly when you look at the defensive backfield as a overall position group, their safety play puts them in that conversation, given the fact that they have Hall of Famers there.
Yeah, and they got guys like Dennis Smith and Billy Thompson. I mean, really, really good. I think that, look, Champ Bailey's he's the best player I ever covered on a daily basis. He was just an unbelievable player to watch. He's fantastic. I mean, you think about, yes, Atwater, great. I mean, they had, John Lynch had a really good run with Denver. Brian Dawkins was okay with Denver. Really cool guy to be around, great leader. I just don't know. It's hard for me. Here's a team that really stood out to me, and it's the Patriots. Finally, we talk about the Patriots, right? Ty Law, Mike Haynes, Rodney Harrison, and Devin McCourty. That's pretty good. That is pretty good. And they got some other guys too that could easily be in the top 4, but that was my top 4 for the Patriots. And, you think about the Belichick era, you think of Brady first, but also you got to think about great defensive back play. They've been excellent in the back end. That's one of the reasons for their dynasty for the great defensive play they had. Some other teams I thought of: Washington. You got Darrell Green. Champ Bailey shows up again. He did have a great run there before he was traded. Ken Houston, one of the all-time great safeties. And then Sean Taylor. People love Sean Taylor. I don't know that he played well enough to really be the legend he is. I'm sorry. Very tragic what happened to him. I don't know where Sean Taylor's career was going. Everybody thinks he was going to be one of the great safeties of all time. Sure, I get that argument. Also, Green Bay comes back again. Herb Adderley, Charles Woodson, Willie Wood, Leroy Butler just got into the Hall of Fame. That's really strong there. And again, Cowboys fans, hey, we're back. Mel Renfro, Deion Sanders, Darren Woodson, Cliff Harris. That's pretty strong to me too. I don't know if the Cowboys really make it. I don't know if the Broncos do. The Steelers. You mentioned the Steelers.
What about the Steelers?
We're talking about Mel Blount, Rod Woodson, Troy Polamalu, Donnie Shell. That's pretty good. The Ravens, you talk about Rod Woodson, Ed Reed, wow, here's where we start. They had guys like, Chris McAllister come through and all that. So this is a tough call. This was one of the more interesting ones when I was doing this, who has the best defensive backs of all time, because there's just so many different ways you can go about, looking at this list.
Well, and it feels a little bit like some of the other conversations we've had about, greatness versus depth, right? I'm with you that I'm not sure Sean Taylor necessarily belongs on most Mount Rushmores for his body of work. It's not that he wasn't great, but I don't think he completed his career to the level, obviously due to tragedy. But Darrell Green and Champ Bailey, there was an era where you couldn't throw to either of those guys' side of the field. It was just completely out of the question. So how do you weigh that? And in Pittsburgh, you're talking about, with Blount and Woodson and Polamalu particularly, you're talking about three of the guys that, when you say greatest of their generation, they're all named. And that means something to me. It's hard for me to look past the fact that no matter what, if you're watching an old NFL Films special from the 70s, 80s, or 90s, you're going to see those three players listed repeatedly, right? So that to me has some weight. And I think that's part of why, in my mind, I kind of put Pittsburgh at the top of the list because of that level of greatness. Also, just brand bias. When I think great defenses, I think Steelers.
That's fair. That's fair. I would make the pitch for the Packers too. Charles Woodson, obviously. You respect Charles Woodson, Defensive Player of the Year with the Packers, Super Bowl champion with the Packers. He had a great run there. Herb Adderley, considered by some maybe the greatest cornerback of all time before kind of the modern era, Deion and all that. Willie Wood, one of the great safeties. Leroy Butler, again, very versatile safety. Finally got his due into the Hall of Fame. I think that's a pretty strong group. That Washington group is really interesting to me, though, because you just think about the top three, whoever you're going to put it for, and that's fine with Taylor or whoever else you want to put there. But again, Champ Bailey, to me, has my ultimate respect as a player. Just absolutely unbelievable. If you can give him to Washington and not just say he's a Denver Bronco, okay. I think he did enough Washington to be on that list. Darrell Green, it goes without saying. Ken Houston was unbelievable, too. So I don't know. This is a tough one for me. But you're leaning Pittsburgh, huh?
No, you've now talked me into it. Okay. So if we just take it down to the Packers and Washington, if we narrow it down to those two, same exercise we did before. So you got Woodson versus, let's say, you can go either way on this, but Woodson versus Champ Bailey for their same era, same dominance. If those two kind of cross each other out, thinking about Butler versus Darrell Green, Adderley becomes sort of the tiebreaker here, right? In some ways, it's really good player. Adderley versus Ken Houston is sort of what this comes down to. Because Willie Wood, Sean Taylor, you could talk me in either way, but right. But Adderley versus Ken Houston becomes the real debate.
I think we did get the Packers quarterbacks right. Let's spread the love a little bit because this is so close. I really kind of like Washington in this group. I feel like. That's a franchise with a lot of history. Those were some great players we just mentioned. I'm willing to go with Washington here. I don't know if you're going to talk me out of it.
A surprise pick. The Zero Blitz pick for the team with the best defensive back, Mount Rushmore. We're giving to Washington, whichever nickname they had at the time. We're going to give that to Washington. So I feel like this went a little smoother than I thought, because this is difficult trying to figure out exactly the best of the best versus and I should say loudly, one thing that we're not doing here and never have done is we're not shorting anybody else, Frank. It's just a matter of trying to figure out,
That's all I said here starting this saying I just want to leave teams off to make everybody angry. I thought that was the whole point of this, Fitz. What are we doing?
Have I mentioned Jerry Rice, Tim Brown, Cliff Branch, Fred Biletnikoff, because like I'm just
I tried to get you the lineman. I tried to get you the lineman. You just that was nice. I was being nice about that.
I didn't feel good about lineman. I felt good about wide receiver. I still think this is the problem with these votes. Sometimes you got to go with what the committee says. It's why I can't even imagine being the chair of any committee. Okay, it is 4th of July, by the way, so we should have a little bit of 4th of July fun. First and foremost, I was the sideline reporter for multiple years for the hot dog eating contest.
Yeah, what was it? You did text this, and I didn't know this. I'm sorry about that. I did not know this, Fitz. What was it like? I just kind of want your summation of what is it like being the sideline reporter at the hot dog eating contest. That the floor is yours, because I don't even know what to ask.
The first year I did it was COVID, right? And so we all had to take the COVID test, and we were indoors. The eaters were separated, and this is a very true story. As they started to eat, because there was no, like usually you're outside, there was no outside like ambiance, right? There was no noise. So all you heard was Joey Chestnut just taking down the hot dogs. And it was so disgusting that they actually turned music on in the room because it was distracting to the other eaters trying to eat, listening to him, like, because it's a very specific thing when you hear somebody go and try and get those dogs down. Like it was interesting, and there's a sort of a smell to the whole thing, like particles of wet bun flying everywhere. It's very messy.
Oh my goodness!
And you learn a lot. Like
wow.
For any people out there that are dabbling, I think that Nick Weary is going to win this year. That's my pick. Nick's been training for a long time. He's this is a big opportunity for him. He's not going to eat anywhere near the number we're used to, but things you can keep an eye on, like humidity makes a difference. So if it's really sticky outside, that makes the hot dogs themselves stickier, which means they don't go down as fast. Like you want it to actually be a little bit cool, a little bit like wet, a little bit moist outside. That helps the dogs go down faster. It's a whole training regimen for everybody. I'm telling you, man. And Joey Chestnut, my guy trains. Like he goes through a whole regimen getting ready. He's the only one of all the major league eaters that only eats for a living. Everybody else has other jobs. So he literally trains all year for his eating contest. And you could tell, man, like you could tell the way he bounces, and he knows right away if he's got the right rhythm, the right vibe. It's a whole thing.
Real quick, so are there egos involved here when you're talking to Joey after? Is it Kobayashi, or is that usual suspects? What am I talking about? Whoever, there was that rivalry. ESPN did 30 for 30. Is there egos involved here? Are they like acting like superstars? Are they like nice dudes?
Everybody's nice, but Joey's definitely aware that he is the moneymaker, and he's not competing this year. There was a brand conflict between his deal with another hot dog company and then the Nathan's hot dog people. There was a brand conflict, so all of a sudden there's a disagreement. So now he's doing, this is drama in hot dog eating contest world. He's doing his own live stream, eating with soldiers at Fort Bliss, I believe it is, and donating money to veteran families for food at the same time that the hot dog eating contest is going on. So like Joey's trying to take this whole thing on. It's quite amazing. But yeah, Joey's definitely an interesting cat. Like you have to schedule, like, because you get to talk to the guys the night before, like you do when you're working an NFL game, and like you got to schedule that, and he's very particular about when it happens. Like Joey's definitely an interesting dude. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That is way more about the hot dog eating contest than I ever thought I would know or ever really wanted to know, to be honest. But yes, being sideline reporter at the hot dog eating contest is,
dude, my phone
on your unique resume. That's a very resume. Yeah.
Every year I did it, people like blew my. I have no idea how many people watched that. And the first year I did it, I thought it was just going to be funny. And all of a sudden, my phone's blowing up, and I'm getting hundreds of texts from people I haven't talked to in a decade. And they're like, "Oh my God, you're on the hot dog eating contest!" Like it is an American tradition like no other. It is weird. How many hot dogs do you think you could down, Frank? Wieners and buns. It's wieners and buns.
I know, you got to eat the buns too. I wouldn't dip it. The whole water thing is gross to me. This whole thing is gross to me. Like even as a dude that can eat, like I can. I still like. I don't watch. I don't like it. I didn't even watch that 30 for 30. I watch all the 30 for 30s. Like literally, I've watched every single one. That was one I had the hardest time with because I was just like, oh, this is just grossing me out. I think I could do like 8. I don't know. Like I don't know. I'm not a competitive eater like you. How many rice powder bowls or whatever you're eating these days down? Like what? Yeah.
I feel like if you include chipmunking, which by the way is the term for at the very end, as long as like the time's up, whatever you can fit in your cheeks. still counts.
Oh,
as long
that
as,
counts? Like, you
as
don't have to...
long
like,
as you don't spit it out. You have to actually swallow it. But like as the time is done...
I've never heard that.
It's called chipmunking. So as long as you can chipmunk... The thing of it is, I can eat a lot of food. I don't eat fast. That's the hard... Like, look, I'm watching a Raiders game. I think if I was over the course of a 3-hour Raiders game, I think if I was being challenged, my general guess on donuts would be I could get between 40 and 50 donuts over a 3-hour.
Good Lord. Are you serious?
Yeah, 100%.
You could eat 50 donuts during a Raiders game.
If we're talking like 50. the regular cake donuts, yeah, I could get between 40 and 50. Yeah, over 3 hours, I could get to that. I don't... But if we're doing it like over the next 3 minutes, I run out of steam. I just like to keep eating make it a stressful Raiders game. I'm getting to 50 easy. Like, is there no food that Frank Schwab just indulges in?
I think I couldn't eat 50 donuts. Charles McDonald, when I cheated on you and went on the exempt list, told his story about eating, I believe it was 89 chicken McNuggets in one sitting. And I'm just like, I could put away food, man. Don't let me loose on a buffet in Vegas or something. But 50 donuts? 50? No.
You cheated on me again this week?
No, that was a couple weeks ago.
I was okay. I just wasn't
Next
sure.
week though, Matt Harmon slid in my DMs, so I'm going.
Are we in an open relationship now, Frank?
We might be now. I don't know, man. Yeah.
Are we seeing other people?
A lot of people hollering at me, man. You know,
this is what happens when you're as good looking as Frank is. Is there an NFL player you think that, like, if you had to bank on one NFL player to be able to go out there and just hoss a bunch of hot dogs, is there one person that stands out?
The name that came to mind was Vita Vea, just because I think he could eat like running backs if he wanted to. Like, he could just pick up like Travis Etienne and like eat him like a chicken bone. Like, I just Vita Vea, yeah, I think he could pound down like 50 donuts in a sitting, like someone else I know. But yes, like 18 million hot dogs for Vita Vea, I'd be like, yeah, sure, I get it. Like, he's just literally like almost inhuman at times.
I'm gonna go with size. Daniel Fa'alele. The offensive lineman is 6'8" and 384 pounds. He's currently the heaviest player in the NFL, according to a quick Google search. So I'm going to say, like, if I got to bank on somebody, I'm banking on a fat guy.
Banking on the big guy. Yeah,
I'm banking on big guy. Although Kobayashi was kind of a little dude, so maybe we've all got this wrong. Maybe we need to find like a little. Maybe Tyreek Hill is actually the guy that we should be banking on.
I know. You always, it's going to be somebody. Which quarterback would you pick? Because I have a pick here. I think Patrick Mahomes has kind of embraced his whole dad bod routine. I think Patrick Mahomes can put down food, man. Like, Patrick Mahomes working out, but he's still, he's not, he doesn't have abs like you, Fitz. So I think Mahomes would kill it. If you just had a quarterback hot dog eating contest and Mahomes is competitive enough, I think he'd want to win. I think Mahomes wins that thing, man. Which quarterback?
Okay, so before the weight loss this year, I would have said Lamar, because Lamar's kind of he's a bigger guy and he had that. But right now, I mean, if there's one quarterback in the NFL, this is such a mean thing to say, and I say it with so much endearing love. If there's one quarterback in the NFL that's starting that's a little fluffy, it's Aiden O'Connell, right? Like, Aiden does not look like he's a little fluffy. Aiden's a little fluffy. He doesn't necessarily have the usual NFL quarterback body. I'm just saying, like,
Stafford, it comes to mind too. He's a big dude. Like,
yeah,
quarterbacks are big guys. Like, people don't realize that if you've never been around them. Quarterbacks are big dudes. Or Matthew Stafford's a big dude. Maybe Matthew Stafford, O'Connell, and Mahomes up there, and you could be the sideline reporter. Come on,
I'm
in for this. $1 million idea.
Now let's have Yahoo do it, and then we'll just commentate on the whole thing while it's going. It'll be what could possibly go wrong. By the way, I'm immediately sorry that I called Aiden O'Connell fluffy. All right, have a beautiful, wonderful, amazing 4th, everybody. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us. We also appreciate producer Joe behind the scenes doing God's work, keeping us on the rails. I don't know if we really were today, but we had a blast. Be sure to chime in on what you thought of our Mount Rushmores. While you're out there, rate, subscribe, review, tell your friends, your family, and enemies. Tell everybody to hang out with us every single week. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, follow us on social media at Yahoo Schwab, at Jason Fitz. We appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for listening.